Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Today we have two student presentations, and as I mentioned, I'd like those to be kept to as close to 30 minutes as possible so that we have time for other things. Frankly, more of your quiz questions will come from my material than from the student material, so it's important that I have time to explain what you might expect to have in the quiz and so forth. This week we're concentrating on the idea of disruptive innovation. Some of you may have heard that term before. The term disrupt is now being used as a verb that's basically relates to competing effectively with a larger organization. So a startup taking control of a market away from a monopoly, a pseudo-monopoly, a monopoly at least that we presume was a monopoly, until the startup came and took them out. And how that happens, and strategies for startups to take out a monopoly, and strategies for a monopoly to block startups from taking them out. This all started with a professor from Harvard named Clayton Christensen. Christensen was himself a successful businessman and had made at least a small fortune when he was, by the time he was 40. And so he went back to get his doctorate degree when he was 40 years old, and has since, in many ways, changed the world. In the world of business, he's turned it upside down. Many of the ideas that we had in business before Clayton Christensen have been turned upside down. All of our perceptions that monopolies had a distinct advantage, and they do in some ways, an insurmountable advantage, though they don't have. They have some flaws that allow kind of David to slay Goliath. And so what Clayton Christensen figured out was what was it that allowed David to slay Goliath, so to speak. Allow the kid to kill the giant. And he was the UK university, the top universities in the UK, including Oxford. Every 2 years, they give an award for the top business thinker. And Clayton Christensen was given this award in both 2011 and 2013, which means he was the reigning champion for 4 years. And I think he could probably continue there, but it's kind of like, for those who follow basketball, he's kind of like the LeBron James of the business world. You could give it to him every year if you really wanted to, but after a while, people start resenting that person, so you give it to somebody else out of charity. He's that guy. He's big enough, his ideas are revolutionary enough that people like, one of the videos I'm going to have you watch from Moodle is him talking to Google and telling Google, I worry about you guys. You might be in trouble, and explaining why they might be in trouble. But the Google people thoroughly have adopted his strategies or his counter strategies on how to stop other people from upsetting them, and I'll explain that later. I think I'll start off with a video, and then I think after the video we'll probably go ahead and have the students give their presentations. But this at least introduces you to the concepts of disruptive innovation. This is Clayton Christensen. Happens to be have at least an undergraduate degree from my alma mater, as did Stephen Covey. Both of them did, and have changed the world. So I'm proud of that. So I'm going to stop my recording and bring up. Okay, just to comment a little bit on that video. I hope you were paying attention to it. It definitely will be a large part of your upcoming quizzes, because I consider this one of the most important business principles of the current generation. Not just one of the most important business principles in the current generation. And that's, like I said, those who give out the award for the best business mind in the world have given it to Clayton Christensen basically over a 4-year period, and given it to him only. As this Washington Post story talks about. So the business world recognizes his genius. And so I think it's very important for you to understand, even though this only applies maybe to some of you, maybe not to all of you, you may find that it does in some subtle way, and that, as I've perhaps said in the past, you don't really know where your life is taking you. So you don't really know how much you're going to be involved in business decisions. Many of you, even if you're a chemistry student and you join a company or an organization that centers on chemistry, well, somebody has to manage that company. And if you're good at what you do and you make good public presentations, things like that, you may become one of the executives, and suddenly you're making the decisions that Dr. Christensen's talking about. So you don't really know when these principles may apply to you. Certainly for any entrepreneur, these are very important principles, because he explains, as you listen to the rest of his videos that I've assigned for homework, he explains how you can start very small, as he was talking about here, and kill a giant, so to speak, because the giant doesn't know how to handle you. He gives lots of other examples, and I'm trying to remember some that he's not giving in the videos that I've... But one of the examples, by the way, it's not the inventor of new technology that does this. The inventor hardly ever causes the disruption because they are inventors. And they rarely are the ones who figure out how to bring it to market and make a profit off of it. We've used the example in the past of the bread slicer that one guy invented, and it was 20 years later when Wonder Bread in America, during the middle of the Great Depression, convinced people that they should buy sliced bread, and within 3 years, more than half of the market went to sliced bread, which, as I explained in the past, Kazakhstan still has it. They're at 1% or less than 1% sliced bread, so nobody sold it to them. So innovation is not usually done by the inventor of the technology. It's usually done by somebody else who figures out how to apply that technology, and it's not even always technology. Trying to think of a good example where it's not technology per se. Well, okay, I'll use the case of Toyota instead of, I was going to use Sony. Sony and is a good example, but I'm going to skip over to Toyota. Toyota had no real strong technical aspect to them overcoming General Motors and Ford. What they did have was an innovative business plan, and they hit the market in the right way that Dr. Christensen talks about. They found a niche in that market that Ford and General Motors were not taking care of. And it's usually almost always at the lower end. It's always, as he was saying here, with PCs competing with mini computers, PCs at that time were crummy. They were not very good. And so it was hard for Digital Computers, the company that got upset, the best company in the world, dealing with computers. It's hard for them to defend themselves because didn't make any sense to defend themselves against these crummy computers that promised a lower profit margin. Why would they want to start building crummy computers at a lower profit margin when they could build better computers at a higher profit margin? It made no sense. And so that's the problem. That's the Achilles heel of big corporations, is that when it comes to disruptive innovations, not always disruptive technology, but disruptive innovations, they, as Dr. Christensen said, they become paralyzed. They don't know what to do. In the case of Toyota, as I said, there was really not a lot of new technology involved in Toyota suddenly overtaking Ford and General Motors. But what they did do was come in at the very bottom of the market at a cheaper price, probably had lower labor cost in Japan than in America at that point. And so they could come in with a cheaper vehicle that Americans could, that people who could not afford a new car before that could suddenly afford. It may sound familiar because it's now happening again with Kia and what's the name of the Chinese car? Sherry or something like that? It's happening again. The whole thing is starting all over again. So you have somebody coming to the very bottom of the market with a lower price, that a lot of people who could not afford a better car could now afford. And so they came in against Ford and General Motors, and General Motors and Ford did try to fight them. Ford had a car called the Pinto, and Chevrolet had the Chevette. And these were cheap cars. And frankly, I guess that if there's a touch of technical innovation, it was that Japan had some very good engineers, and their cheap cars were better than Ford and General Motors' cheap cars, and probably still a little bit cheaper. So they were a little bit better and a little bit cheaper. And so people still went to Toyota, to where Ford and GM finally decided it's not really worth fighting these guys because we don't make any money off these cheap cars. So there's no reason to fight for the low profit margins for cheap cars. Let them have this market. And actually, the company's profitability increased when they got rid of those cheap cars and let Toyota have that very bottom of the market. The problem was, then they started moving up, and their product got better. At first, it wasn't very good. And he says in almost every case, when people come and disrupt an industry, it's with something that's not very good, but is affordable to more people. And so, just like PCs that were, again, in this other story, were not very good yet, but they were cheap enough that the common person could buy them, like myself. I bought one of my in-laws bought one of the Radio Shack, one of the first Radio Shacks. That was the first, I think, PC that really hit the market. And then Commodore came in, and I bought one of the first Commodores that hit the market. So some of us still jumped at them, saying, this is the future, and we can do some things with this that we couldn't do before. So just like that, in comes Toyota with these cheap cars, and ultimately, and the people who, the monopolies in the market, the monopolies in the industry basically said, it's not worth fighting them. And so instead of fighting, they flee. Fight or flee is the question, and they decide to flee. They flee upscale, which is the worst thing they can do. Because then that allows the new guy, the startup, to come in and then get a little bit better. So their poor products become better products. And they're not satisfied with the low end of the market. They come up a scale. And now they have a good enough reputation that they can compete at the next scale up. And then they build their reputation even more, and you go up a little more. I had a 1990 Toyota pickup, a little truck, that I was still driving in 2010. So it was already 20 years old, and it ran beautifully. It was an incredible. I had people walking off the streets. It had such a reputation. People walked off the streets and begged me to sell them my 20-year-old pickup. And so even though so they entered the market around 1980, by 1990 they had as good or better reputation than their top competitors and the monopolies, so-called monopolies, oligopolies, I guess you call them. And so at that point, now they could go up to any level of car manufacturing they wanted to, which they have, and they are beating General Motors and Ford at any level of quality of car. But now, as I said, in comes Kia. And where does Kia go? One thing that Dr. Christensen explains is that if Kia came in at the top level and started competing with Toyota's highest quality, they would fail for sure. That there's no examples of somebody coming in and competing at the highest quality level. To come in, you come at the low end. And so that's, of course, what Kia did too. So they come in at the very bottom with a cheaper car, because now Japan's labor costs have gone up, and Korea's kept theirs down a little bit, so a little bit cheaper labor, and they have great engineers. So they start creating a cheap car and again, Toyota says, why do we fight them? Well, we don't make any money off those cheap cars anyway, so we'll let them have that cheap market, basically. They don't fight real hard for it. And so Kia's taking over, and they're moving upscale again. And we will expect to see Sherry do the same thing. They'll come in at the low end. People who can't afford the low end of Kia will now buy the Chinese car, and it will move upscale. This has an impact on entire economies, by the way. especially those economies that don't understand these principles. Dr. Christensen points out that Japan is in trouble because after years of, if you listen to the videos you were supposed to listen to last week, Zig Ziglar was talking about how Japan, after the war, had been totally decimated. But they set, as a nation, they set a goal that by the end of the 1950s, they would be the number one industry or number one country in the world in the production of textiles, that is clothing and stuff. And they did. They accomplished that. In the 1960s, they set the goal, I believe it was, to be number one in, I may get the order of this wrong, in steel. And yet they had no iron ore in Japan, hardly at all. They didn't have much coal. And so they had to import all the raw materials to become the number one steel producing country in the world, and yet they did it. They did it by the end of the 1960s. 1970s, they decide, okay, we're going to become the number one country in the world in appliances, and especially electronic appliances, radios, TVs. And by the end of the 1970s, they did it. And so in the 1980s, they said, we're going to become number one in the world in car production. They came in and they did it. So they had lots of support. They had a lot of focus. They had, in economies like that, lots of people want to be engineers. And so that gives you lots of expertise in being innovative. You have a lot of people in America, nobody wants to be an engineer anymore. For America to keep its economic status, it has to have immigration, because it does not have enough engineers to fill all the jobs. It does not have enough mathematicians to fill the jobs, because Americans don't want to be mathematicians. And now they're seeing that the same things happen in Japan. The younger generation does not want to be engineers and mathematicians anymore. They want to go into liberal arts and stuff. And so you see that entire economies go through these cycles that it's actually lucky for America, as much as the conservatives, and I am a conservative, but in this I disagree with them, as much as the conservatives want to complain about immigration, America absolutely needs immigration to keep maintain its economy. Absolutely. It cannot fill those roles because the young people in America don't want to fill those roles. Whereas Japan is in trouble because it's a very homogeneous society and they don't want a lot of immigration, and they don't really have room for a lot of immigration. And so they are in big trouble. There's an analysis that shows that Japan's, in order to maintain its current social services, will have to raise its taxes by like 250% in the next 30 years or so, which is impossible. You can't do it. You destroy your society to try to do that. So they're in a real pickle because they are, like I said, they don't particularly want, and nor can they really handle a lot of immigration in their small territory. And yet, they're not a new generation of mathematicians and engineers and technical people coming up to take over the industry. So, anyway, these theories of Dr. Christensen are not only accepted by people like Google and the world's number one computer chip company, Intel. People like that are all listening to them and trying to adjust accordingly. With Google, for example, you may have noticed a few years ago they built a new corporation over Google. So Google is not the top corporation in their own group of companies now. There's a company above them, and parallel to Google are the startups. They spend $3.5 billion on moonshots. That is, on new ideas, new innovations that may pay nothing. They throw $3.5 billion at those moonshots, and they do not give Google control over those moonshots, because Google is now an established company, and now it thinks like an established company. It's looking at profit margins and so forth, and so it will not make the right decisions when it comes to a startup. And so all their startups, because they've listened to Dr. Christensen, all their startups are made their own corporation, and Google has no power over them. They basically say, here's your $1 billion or whatever, go succeed if you can. And they're given total independence because the mentality of a startup is totally different than the mentality of a successful company. And so they're directly listening to Dr. Covey as they're proceeding into their future and trying to maintain their leadership in the world of innovation. Okay, so I'm going to stop this and need it. Okay, good.
A very good morning to Professor Ken and my fellow classmates. Today we are going to present Chapter 12, Taking Control of Your Future. And I am Shai Xiang. They are Hui Qi, Yenny, and Yingdong. First of all, I would like to ask, did you ever think about what kind of job you want to do after graduate? Of course, yes, is it? College is the last step for us toward a fulfilling and exciting career. But nowadays, the employment markets and job-seeking technique have changed. Therefore, it is not easy for us to make a clear directions in order to respond to the changing needs of today's job market. Through this chapter, we will learn that why is it important to make a clear direction for our future career, and what should we do and how we do it. And now I would like to talk about the dream of lifetime. We all have our own life goals and objectives. They might be specific or very general. Regardless of what they may be, they are important because they can influence our decisions for our future. So, understanding what motivates our goals is essential because we might be able to prioritize our thoughts about future. And we can list down the important dream statement and take a close look at it and use it as a guide to achieve our goal. Then, for career exploration, we first need to understand the difference between a job and career. A job lets us enjoy a minimal levels of financial security, and it requires us to show up and do what we need to do. In exchange, we will get paid. While a career involves holding jobs, but it is more about achieving personal fulfillment. A career requires planning, knowledge, and skill. To fulfill our career, it needs us play our analytical and critical thinking skill to make a decision that might affect our life in both short term or long term. And these are the 4 career exploration process. Phase A is who am I? There are 6 categories of people based on personality, interest, and skill. First, realistic person are doers more than thinkers, and they prefer working with machines, tools, plants, and animals. Then investigate person love problem solving and analysis. They like to observe, learn, and prefer working alone. Followed by is artistic. This kind of people are creative, intuitive, and interested in artistic aspect. Then for social person, this kind of people are friendly, love to help, and have strong verbals. While for enterprising, they are confident and risk takers and have leadership. And the last one is conventional. This kind of person are dependable, disciplined, and practical. They work well with data and people. Phase B is what out there. Our personality are closely related in choosing our career. For realistic person, they can work as a contractors or mechanic. Then investigate person are suitable to work as a pharmacist or geologist. While artistic person can work as a musician or architect. Next, for social person, they can work as a teacher or a counselor. Then for enterprising person, they are suitable to work as a sales manager or a banker. Lastly, for conventional people, they can work as a database manager or an auditor. Followed by is phase C. There are many factors which we need to consider when making decisions. First is timing. We need to consider about time we need in planning our future career. Next is finance. We need to think what investment should we make in order to success in our career. While for location, we need to consider does our career require us to relocate. Lastly, for family and personal, we need to consider how our career affect our family and personal life. All of these factors will affect us in choosing future career. Next is phase D. Where do I go from here? When in college, we need to find opportunity to expose ourselves to the career that we might interested in. Then we can also develop relationships with college counselor. The counselor can be of great help in matching us to our interest careers and ensure that we make a right choice. And that's all for my presentation. I will pass to Hui Chi to continue.
Hi, I'm Hui Chi. So now I'm going to talk about choosing the major. Choosing a major can have a big impact on your career choices, especially if you are following a technical or vocational program of study. Like for us, we can't become a scientist or psychologist one day because Annie and Shai Xiang major course are finance and Yindong and me are international business. Although everyone now is a degree student, but I believe that many of you have no idea of what are you going to study in the college or university after graduate from secondary school. It is not easy to choose a major course you like and useful for your future job. So now I'm going to talk about some tips for choosing a major. The first one, follow your dreams. Your first instinct in choosing a field of study is probably based on your dreams and life experience. Make sure your choice is based on your dreams and interests and not those of your parents or your friends. The second one, make it fun. Try to ask yourself, what do you like to do for fun? What kind of magazines do you read? What websites are bookmarked on your computer? What kind of volunteer work have you done? And after that, you will find out that the answer to these questions tell you about the kind of career you will enjoy. Then you will know what major are you going to choose. The third one, build on your skills. A good choice of a program of study is not based exclusively on your likes. It should also consider your skills. What courses did you ace in your high school? It is hard to keep a level of determination to track a tough subject if you don't enjoy it. The following, ask around. Find people who are following the course of studies you are considering. Ask them what they like and dislike about their majors. If you can find recent graduates with that major, ask them about the value about their major. The next one, what makes you unique? If you have a major that you would like to pursue that is not offered at your college or university, find out if you can play your own major. This option is especially attractive if you want to combine two seemingly different disciplines into a major. For example, dance and athletics, sociology and film. Be open to change. Once you have selected a major, don't panic if it turns out to be a wrong choice. Consider it a step towards finding the right program for you. Repeat the major's selection progress, but carefully consider what you learned from your original major choice. Try to find out the reason of why it was not the right choice or it was not a right major. Did it not match your interests? Was the work too heavy? Were the course too tough? And now I'm going to talk about choosing the right stuff. Have you ever think about what do you need to launch a good career? Employer will look at your educations, skills, and also experience. Make sure you have the right stuff in these three areas is what you should focus on in your college experience. Education is important and I believe everyone knows it is. And this is why we are here. So now I'm going to talk about the tips about the other right stuff, which is skills and experience. The second requirement for employment is skills. Many of the skills you need are career specific. We call those work-based skills. These include knowing how to use equipment that is specific to your career and mastering programs that are used in your field. But this is not the only skill you need to be successful. The second set of skills you must have are called transferable skills because they can be used in almost all occupations. This including thinking skills, communication skills, and also listening skills. This skill set is very broad, and your extent of mastery will vary from skills to skills. Therefore, you should identify those skills that are most important to your career objective and develop and master them. Are you ready for a test draft? Experience is the third set of qualification employer look for, and is the one that often stumps students. Relevant experience is not only important as a job qualifications. It can also provide you with a means to explore or test out occupational options and build a contact list that will be valuable when networking for your career. But how can you gain relevant experience without experience to begin with? You should consider 3 options: volunteering, internship, and part-time job. The first one, volunteering. Volunteering is especially good for students looking to work in social or artistic occupations. You can master many transferable skills through volunteering, with a little brainstorming and an understanding of your career field. You should be able to come up with relevant volunteering experience for just about any career. Next, internship. Internship focus on gaining practical experience related to a course or program of study. Intern work for an organization or company for reduced wage or steep or volunteering in exchange for practical experience. A successful internship program should create a win-win situations. The intern should add value to the company efforts, and the company should provide a structured program in which the student can learn or practice work-related skills. Remember that a skill objective of your internship is to develop relationships you can use for mentoring and networking during your career. Be friend to people. Ask questions. Go the extra mile in terms of what is expected to you. With genuinely participate in the enterprise. The extra effort will pay dividends in the future. And last but not least, part-time employment may be an option if your study schedule provide enough free time. If so, be sure to investigate opportunities in your field of study. Ask your instructor and the career guidance or placement office to help you generate job links, even if they are not specific in this area you want to be working in. If you are lucky enough to find a job in your field of study already and are using your college experience to enhance your career opportunities, be sure to link what you are learning to what do you do on the jobs, and what you do on the job to what you are learning. This cross-link will make you a much stronger candidate for future opportunities and a much better student in the short terms. So now I'm going to pass to Yenny to continue her part.
Thank you, Hui-Chi, and now I'm the third speaker, Yenny. Now I'm going to discuss about the career development. When should you start develop your career? You should start thinking of your career developments during your university years, but not 6 months or 6 months or 6 weeks before you graduate. What should you develop? The thing that you need to develop is yourself as a professional, and why you need to develop is because career development will help you to prepare yourself to get your first job and how to get organized for career development.
First, start by organizing yourself. You should set some space in developing and hunting for your future career. By making good use of technology, you can create a file for all of the related documents on your computers and remember to make a backup. During your career explorations, you can use notebooks for recording and tracking phone cells or making some notes. You also can create folders in your browser bookmarks menu on your computer for keeping tracks for the job informations. And the next step is getting organized is understand your financial status. You should have a clear picture of how you can invest your money and times and when your investment will be to pay off. Therefore, you should project your cash flow and prepare a personal budget. Next, start identifying the resources that help you to explore and select occupations like gathering occupational information and careers reference guide. Set goals for yourself is important too. You can set long-term goals in your career planning and then set short-term goals to fulfill your long-term goal. The networking is important in your career development. So, what is networking? Networking is the process of engaging others in helping you to reach an objective. Networking is something that require to plan thought and deliberate activities. Furthermore, you need to have to look for someone that can give you information, guidance, or some recommendations in your career development. Therefore, you must be clear about your purpose for networking. The process of networking involves 3 basic phases: prospect identifications and management, making contact, and follow-up. The first phase involves identifying whom you should speak to and the people who can introduce you to them. This is because that these people can assist you in your career exploration, such as they can introduce a job or an internship for you, but first you need to find a connection with them. For an instance, if you are going to a conference or a class, you have to identify who will you meet and be prepared with the topics you can steer your contacts toward. And you can get their contact easily through exchange link card. Therefore, you need to manage your contact effectively to build a good network. Building a strong network is important too. This is because time consuming and you should start building your professionals networking now. While making contact, there are some networking basics and elements of etiquette that need to apply to all contacts. First, be mindful of your contact's time. You must keep your call and emails concise but brief, and if you are calling, remember to ask whether it's a good time to talk. Next, if this is a short contact, you must tell the contact where you got their contact. This can turn an interrupting cold call into a warm call with the interested individual. You must be specific about how the contact can help you and know what you are asking for and do so directly. You can use your network for more than just asking for jobs. You can seek for some advice on practical aspects of your occupations and help the others in your network, because networking is not a one-way endeavor. Therefore, you must be willing to offer your assistance whenever you can. The last phase is follow-up. The first step is to thank them for the help and don't be too late to reply them. Then, also keep in touch with the people in your network. And when you encounter problems that they might help you with, don't be shy for asking for their help. After that, don't forget to send a follow-up note of thanks to the person who
help you. At last, if the person in your network asks for your help, do what you are able to do. That's all my presentations, and now I would like to pass to the last speaker. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm the last speaker. My name is Yindong. I will talk about the resume and the cover letters. So what is resume? Resume is a summary of experience and it has a purpose to get you invited for an interview. It is a combination of business documents, marketing piece, and personal preference. So to perform a good resume, you have to keep it short. You have to make it for 1 page, and you can make it for 2 pages if you have a lot of experience. Second, focus on accomplishment. You can point out the position you hold and your strength. Include numbers. You can include the dollar amount or percentage to support your achievement. Use keywords and keep your information easy to find. To talk about the elements of the resume, for the header, you should include personal information and complete contact information like full name, address, email address, and your contact number. And include the objective. Include a short sentence summary of the kind of positions you are looking for. And for the resume body, you have to list down the experience in reverse chronological order. Each entry includes title, company name, company locations, and the date held the positions. You have to state the major achievement in the positions. So if you've done your resume, we proceed to the reviewing part. Make sure your resume is short and sweet. Make sure you can support every point you make on your resume. Name the resume file clearly as the pictures, and formatting wisely for the font, margins. For the cover letter is to entice the recipients to read your resume. It emphasizes your knowledge, skills, or experience. Make sure you have state the job position you apply. You have to be clear, be concise, and be careful. Make sure the spelling and grammar are correct, and double check the spelling of the company name. Read the document and keep the formatting simple. So I will talk to the last part, interviewing for success. So there are 3 types of interview mentioned in the textbooks. Is informational or networking interview, screening interview, and one-to-one interview. For informational interview, it helps to explore career options. It requires you to learn the company and present yourself. It gives an opportunity to create a positive impressions, and you have to get referrals, recommendations, and leads. For the screening interview, it determines whether you are qualified or overqualified. So screening interview is to remove the people in a candidate pool, and so the initial interview via telephone will be conducted. For the one-to-one interview, the interviewer will ask a set of questions to learn if you have the knowledge to handle the job. They want to know a sense of what it will be like working with you and how will you fit in the company. The interviewer will learn how you behave in the past situations as a predictor that you are likely to behave in the future. So this is the tips for preparing the interview. First, learn about the organizations. Learn the organization's philosophies, goals, plans, like corporate strategies, competitive strategies. Use your network. You can learn from others. The third one, reveal the job description. You have to be prepared to explain your qualifications. The fourth one, review your resume. You have to be able to describe your accomplishment. The fifth one, use the study guide. You can practice the interview study guide that I will explain later. Prepare yourself physically. You have to eat well and get enough sleep before the interview. Dress to impress. You have to dress professionally to give a positive and good impressions. Or you also can ask for a dress code. And punctuality. You have to confirm the date and time and the locations of the interview. So during the interview, You have to avoid distraction by turning off the phone. Relax, take a deep breath and smile, and be yourself. Keep your tone conversational and make eye contact with the interviewer. Keep your answer focused on your skills and knowledge and avoid one-word answers. You have to be truthful in answering the questions, and if you don't understand, you can ask for clarification, or you can't find out the answer, you can offer to find out the answers and get back to them later. So here is the interview study guide that comment asked during the interview. So the first one is, tell me about yourself. So in this, you can introduce yourself. Second one, what can you offer us and why should we hire you? In these questions, you can state out your qualifications, years of experience, educations and transferable skill. The third one, what are your strengths? You can point out your achievement, experience, performance reviews and the positive feedbacks. What are your weaknesses? In here, don't be worried to acknowledge the weaknesses. Where do you see yourself 3 to 5 years from now? You can think about your personal goals and answer them. What attracted you to our company? You can draw from research and personal knowledge. Tell me about a time you were under pressure to meet a deadline and what you did. In here, you can describe the problem you have faced before and the action taken and the positive outcomes. What will former employers say about you? You have to be honest and think the positive things. What salary are you expecting? Before interview, you have to do salary search online. What questions do you have for me? You have to type the question back to something the interviewer has said earlier. After the interview, you must thank the interviewer. So in conclusions, get employed require personal motivations and you have to independently improve yourself to increase your chances of finding a job. Thank you. Here's the Q&A sections with answers. So that's all from us. Thank you.
So again, next week we'll end up with 3 student presentations. Everybody be prepared, and we'll jump right into it right at the start of the class. In case we don't have time for me to say anything, then you'll have to learn everything from my stuff from Moodle. Okay, then we go ahead and talk some more about Dr. Christensen, and we may watch another video or even 2. Let me proceed and explain. As I said, there's actually on Moodle, I believe, only two videos to watch, but they're longer videos. So one is more than an hour, and one is, 45 minutes or something. So they're basically 2 hours of video to watch. But hopefully you'll enjoy them. One of them is to Google, where he's actually meeting with Google officials and talking about his theories with the Google officials. The other one is actually a kind of a Q&A session. In fact, at the end of the first one with Google, there's a Q&A that's really valuable because you have some really smart people at Google, obviously, and they start challenging his ideas, and he has to defend himself, and he does a very good job of defending himself. But sometimes it's actually helpful to have people challenge you a little bit. And so the Q&A at the end of Google is good. And then they have a panel discussion. In the second one's a panel discussion with just a guy to ask questions. Then there's Christensen, and then there's one of the top investors in Silicon Valley, kind of a high-risk investor named Andreessen. And so he has a lot of interesting insights as well. I see. Before I go into that, let me do make a couple of comments on the student presentation I was going to make, and I don't want to go ahead without doing that, I guess, first. So before we go on with Christensen, this was probably one of the more valuable presentations that we have from the book. in the sense that it's talking about how to get a job. And even though some of you are not too far into your university careers yet, it's not too soon to be thinking about what you're gonna do when you're done with your get your diploma. And one of them, I guess, a couple of things I would mention. One idea that I had, first off, your first goal here is to learn, not to get good grades. I'm not saying learn to not get good grades, but if you have to choose between the two, learning is more important than good grades. Let me put it that way. What you learn is what will really determine your future. I had a way of attacking, when I was doing my bachelor's degree, I did two things that were quite different. First off, I took a lot of classes I didn't have to take. I ended up graduating with about 15 credits more than I needed. So I had basically a whole other semester that I didn't have to take. And even then, I left college before I intended to. I was going to take a whole other semester. So I would have graduated with at least 30 credits too many. But because there were classes I wanted to take and felt like they might be important in my future, I kept taking classes. Some universities won't even let you do that. So I don't know if I'm a little bit vague as to whether Xiamen will let you take classes you're not supposed to take. But I did. At my university, they didn't care. You keep taking as many classes as you wanted to. And so I did. But I had a special way of doing it. I almost always took at least 20 credits, or thereabouts, almost exactly 20 credits every time. Sometimes maybe 18, 20 credits anyway. Sometimes maybe 21. But I had a way of doing it. And because they didn't control our classes as much as they do some other places at my university, I would organize them in a different way than most students. So, for example, I already knew I was very interested in education. I thought I might be teaching at the high school level. So I was taking a lot of education classes that would lead me to getting a teaching certificate for high school. But regardless, I really enjoyed education, and I knew that at the time. So, but when I took education classes, I would take a whole bunch at once. So I might take 4 education classes at the same time. And then another semester I'd take 4 journalism classes at the same time. And another semester I'd take 4 political science classes at the same time. Because I found, basically because of the way I learned Spanish. When I was a little bit younger than you guys, probably, I decided to take off of college and go become a volunteer in Central America. So I lived in Guatemala and El Salvador 2 years. But the program I was in put us through an immersion program. And it's actually an immersion program I suggested for Xiamen. And we learned a new language in 2 months. And you say, well, that's impossible. Well, it's not impossible. It's probably the best language school in the world. But the way the school worked is you walked in, and the day you walked in, they said, you can't speak English anymore. They let us speak English for part of one day a week. When we had our day when we could do some recreation, then they expected we'd probably speak in our native language then. But other than that, we had classes from 8 in the morning till 8 at night, and we did not speak English. We lived in dorms, and they tried to control whether or not we would speak any English in our dorms and stuff too. They basically wanted our cooperation in being in not speaking our native language. And because of that, within 2 weeks, I started dreaming in Spanish. I didn't know the vocabulary, so my brain was actually making up words in some cases because I didn't know enough Spanish to actually have a decent conversation yet. But one of the keys in learning a new language is beginning to think in it. And already after 2 weeks, my brain was trying to think in Spanish. Our job as volunteers included teaching. And so we would be assigned with another volunteer who had already been there for at least 7 or 8 months, maybe a year. And so that person would do most of the teaching, but always ask the new person to do some teaching. And even if it was just memorized teaching, they would do some teaching still. And then within 8 months, I became the senior companion, so to speak, and so I had to do most of the teaching, while my junior companion did a little bit of teaching. But I learned Spanish well enough through this process in just 2 years that 30 years later, I got a contract to prepare and the video, because it may be a little bit confusing if you don't have some understanding of business. So let me just jump ahead here a little bit and find it. Okay, so one of the things he found in the area of business is that there's kind of, in fact, at one point he calls it a religion. A religion in business grew out of that kind of said, thou shalt run your business by the formulas, by the ratios that we have created for you. That's the religion. And so they had certain rules, like, for example, internal rate of return is a ratio that tells you whether or not what kind of investment you should make. And because of that rule, and that's just one of the rules that fouls up, that has helped destroy businesses, because of those rules that they've been going by for so many years, they make wrong decisions. Some of the innovations that Dr. Covey talks about, there's different types of innovations, and 3 of the major innovations he talks about. There's another one called potential products, which is not in this chart, but I think you may be exposed to someplace else. But there's 3, here he talks about 3 different types of innovation. The first one is disruptive. Disruptive innovation is something that comes in and kind of takes the market by storm, and is something like Toyota moving to the market, Sony coming in with transistor radios versus the vacuum tube radios that RCA was building. It's anyway, those sorts of revolutions that we've seen quite a few of. Another type is once you start building your industry, then you go to sustaining innovations. Sustaining innovations makes your product better, and so you get better and better and better products. So one of his examples is computers. When it first came out, it was really crummy, and you could try to type a letter on it, and you had to wait for it to catch up with you because the processors weren't very fast. But then as time went on, sustaining innovation made that computer better and better, until now the chips that you typically buy from Intel or other sources are much faster than the normal person needs. It almost always, unless you have some sort of a problem internally, some sort of conflict or something, you can almost always type, that it'll always be faster than you can type. And so the sustaining innovations just makes things better and better until they're actually better than most people need. The third is over here, the efficiency innovations. That's the third one. Efficiency innovations is how to make more profit by running your business better, making this product. And so this is where maybe robotics might come in. They might replace a bunch of people with robots. They don't need people anymore. But it's other more subtle efficiencies than that. But it almost always, whatever efficiencies they build, that they invent or innovate in efficiency, it almost always means people will be laid off. People will lose jobs. Disruptive technology almost always grows jobs. The sustaining innovation is kind of a wash, but efficiency innovations almost always cost jobs. There's going to be fewer people needed. So these internal rate of return and other ratios like that basically tell good business people. In fact, that's one of the things that came up in the conversation that you'll watch when you watch this video between Andreessen and Christensen. Andreessen said it used to be that the common thought was that if you want to destroy a company, you find one that's poorly managed. And now because of Christensen, you realize actually it's easier to disrupt a company that is well run. Somebody who knows all the formulas, who's trying to do everything that Harvard Business School would teach them to do, because they use formulas that are antiquated and actually are hurting them. So consequently, companies now, and you see this, he said a lot in Japan, are spending all their capital on efficiency. That is, usually efficiency innovation will give you a positive return within a year, and there's almost no risk at it, very little risk in efficiency innovation. But the problem is that, and whereas on the other hand, on the other side, with disruptive innovation, it's usually a 10-year payout. It may be 10 years before you make any money on it. And there's high risk. You might not ever make money off it. So on the one side, you have high risk, long payout. The other side, low risk, good payout in a short term. So which one are you supposed to take? And people who are trained at Harvard and other places say, well, that's obvious, that's duh. We're going to take the investment that is a low risk, good return, short term. Efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. But Dr. Christensen says that basically that's what companies are doing over and over and over again. And so places like Japan have had very few disruptive technologies in the last 20 years. America doesn't have it. I mean, it has Silicon Valley, and so it's working on its innovations, but it doesn't have near as many innovations as it should have because they're not investing the capital into it. They're going with efficiency. So even entire economies are affected by what the corporations are doing. Are they building disruptive technology, or are they just doing efficiency? Efficiency of innovation, time after time after time. And consequently, one of the things he points out here is very interesting. Every year, about $35 billion. No, excuse me, $350 billion is being invested in high risk, high return sort of stuff in Silicon Valley, places like that. And that seems like a lot of money. And I may have the number wrong. I think they will, if you watch that video, they give you the right number. I think I'm wrong about that number. But anyway, whatever the number was, it's quite high. To the average person, we think of it as being high. But he pointed out that the Fortune 500 companies in America are paying out in dividends that same year $1 trillion. So they're paying out a lot more to their stockholders than they're investing in the future. And yet right now, what do the stockholders do with that money? You put it in the bank and it pays you almost nothing. Well, he pointed out that I believe that's the right number, $7 trillion in the world are being invested in bonds that you actually do not make money on at all. You have to pay to have your money securely in a bond, like a government bond. So you're actually not making any money at all. And so there's $7 trillion there, plus $1 trillion being paid out, more than that, but just in America and just the Fortune 500 companies, $1 trillion being paid out in dividends to the investors, and only I think it's actually less than $100 billion being invested in Silicon Valley in these new startups. So his point is, you have trillions of dollars that not being invested in producing innovation that is of value. They're just sitting in banks and sitting in bonds and stuff like that. So this affects the companies that do not invest in disruptive technology will pretty soon find competitors will. And so they're setting themselves up to fail because the competitors will invest in disruptive technology while they're investing in efficiency technology. And so they're just preparing themselves for somebody to disrupt them and to overthrow them in their own market. So this is the part of what Dr. Christensen has found to be kind of turn the business world upside down, that you have to ignore the ratios. You can't be going with internal rate of return and ratios like that in the business world anymore, or you are creating a destination that you don't want. You're going to fail if you do that. You have to invest in disruptive innovation. Even if you're taking risk, you can't afford not to. You can't afford not to do that. So you have to ignore some of these formulas that business schools teach you in order to do that, because the business formulas say don't do that. Take the safe investment. But the reality is you're dooming yourself if you take the safe investment time after time after time. You're dooming yourself. So you have to ignore the religion built around ratios and formulas that don't understand the reality of the world. Okay, well, our time has passed, and we will see you then next week. If you have any questions or anything, I'll be here for a little bit.